And my dad, he would come to the games, but a lot of times he'd come to the games, drunk.
Your grandpa murdered a dog.
It was the Hail Satan room, and my job was to literally stab Jesus Christ upside down on a cross and say Hail Satan. You're out there all night till 1 or 2 in the morning, and there's partying and drugs and death metal.
Jesus.
And one night he comes home, my dad said, "Hey, give me $20," and my friend Kenny said, "Hey, let's throw him through a door."
And then that being said, let's throw your dad through the door, and you're like, yeah, that sounds like a great idea.
And that's when I got introduced to ecstasy. The fire comes and it lights the tip of the gas can. So then I go like this and I throw it backwards. And I looked up in the trees. All the trees were lit on fire, like they were freaking out. I take all the drugs I have in my pocket and I throw them deep in the woods.
What did they do with the prisoners during Katrina with something like that?
They shipped a lot of them out, from my understanding, and then they a lot of them, they got stuck there too, and it was just chaos. I get pulled over at gunpoint, and they're like, the cops then, the police, they were already wild, Now, they were just like, let somebody come steal, let them act crazy. My friend Kyle, his dad died in Katrina. So people actually died. It's not like a conspiracy, like drown.
There is a conspiracy about the levees, but we don't have to get into it on this podcast. And that's kind of what I was starting with the idea behind your testimony is that it's interesting. Because if somebody asks who's Vincent, nobody knows who Vincent is.
Exactly.
Everybody thinks they're more important than somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a me monster. It's all about me. Most people actually. I'll start with this. Most people want to start podcasts because they think it's about themselves, or they think it's cool, or they want to talk to their friends and just joke around. And most of them are comedians, and they're just joking. That's it. But what they don't realize is the podcast is about your guests. It's about building value in other people's lives.
Yeah, that's the thing, when you talk about testimony with my life, when you said growing up, who is Vincent, or people don't know Vincent. That was the thing. Growing up, I had, my parent, my mom and dad, we were together. My dad was an alcoholic, and everybody knew that was my friend. They knew that my dad was an alcoholic, but he was a nice guy. He was a great provider, always went to work, and my mom worked a lot. So I spent a lot of my time growing up at my grandma's house. My dad was offshore, and my mom was just constantly working. So I spent a lot of my time at my grandma's house, and my mom's mom, awesome people. My mom's dad, great. I would say, I don't want to say great guy, just a great grandpa in a way. Always brought me to baseball practice, everything, but he was like a schizophrenic, bipolar, and he would have manic, just temper tantrums that were just crazy growing up. So,
So your dad was away, and the only father figure you kind of had.
Well, my dad worked offshore. He was a part of my life, but my dad's dad wasn't around for him, so he really didn't know how to be the best dad. But he tried, always would protect me and different things like that. As far as but he was negligent in a way of how he partied, or when he came home from off working on the boat for a month and was the first 3 or 4 days back home for this 2 weeks off, he was partying or using his drugs or whatever, and I just kind of, that's just what it is, and he would come around, and I was playing sports. That was my main thing, was just playing baseball. So I kind of just hid behind baseball and different sports. So I was always involved. My grandma and my grandpa always bringing me to, sporting events. And my mom would make them. She would come to the games. She just wasn't available because she was working so much. And my dad, he would come to the games, but a lot of times he'd come to the games, drunk or just kind of embarrassing. So I just kind of lived in that thing oh, there's my dad. What's he going to do now? But my dad passed away in 2009, and there's a lot of stuff that we could have did different, and he could have did different, but it's all said and gone.
As a kid, how did you take that? As in, you see other kids with their parents or how they might be treated, but how did you take that as a kid? Was it more so I'm not going to let this affect me, or was it kind of almost like you were embarrassed because of it? I'm just asking.
I was embarrassed. I was embarrassed, and people. My thing was I wanted what other kids' parents had. I wanted someone to correct me. I wanted that because I knew at my house or my grandma's house or my mom's, wherever I was at, they had no rules. So I just did whatever I wanted. So when I would see other kids, parents, like I learned, like as like about 10 years old, I learned that I grew up different when somebody was like, hey, I have to ask my parents. And I was like, what is that? Like, you can't sleep over. And it's like, that didn't even cross my mind. It was just kind of like, hey, this is where I'm going to be. This is what I'm doing. And again, it was all circulated around, it was all around sports. So I was at the Girard playground. I was playing sports here. My grandma, and so we were all in the clique, and I would see, the other parents and, how they were, and just more, more, I guess, say well off. Because I went to a private school and everything, but I didn't really have, and I had the nice things, but I didn't have as like, a steady home, a safe home, as to say, at my, live bouncing around from different apartments. My dad worked a lot of different jobs, so my main security was from my grandma. And then growing up at my grandma's house, my grandpa, if you woke him, like he was just a maniac a lot of times. Like he would be at the sporting games and he would just go off and just flipping out. I'm talking about 10-year-old games, cursing the umpires, doing craziness. And then he would literally, if the Saints would lose a game, he would go, sleep for that whole weekend until he went back to work. And he was my grandpa was an awesome worker, worked at Cummins, one of the best diesel mechanics, fix your truck, do anything for you. But when he got mad, he got mad. And your father had talked about how people, when they're angry, they try to control the situation. And it just, when it's not in order. And that's how my grandpa was. You'd sit at a table and, the dinner wasn't prepared properly, and he would just pick up a wooden garbage can and just break it. Just shatter it. Or growing up, I always heard, your grandpa killed a dog when growing up. And I never understood that story. It was like, he killed a dog. What do you mean? Well, it turns out when my mom gave her testimony at Celebrate Recovery, because she grew up in that dysfunctional home, and it affected her, when she had a sleepover with her kid, with her friends, I think she was 12 or 13 years old, at her house. That was the night that my grandpa killed that dog.
So your grandpa murdered a dog?
Yeah, the dog was barking, and he, I don't know the whole story, and he went outside and he killed it. My mom, when she told the story, it so affected her that from that incident, it made her feel like worthless and like inadequate. Because I never, growing up, they would always say, look, your mom is this, your mom is that, and my mom would just be more like settle, and I'm like, I never saw that because I didn't, but that when my mom in Celebrate Recovery, in her testimony, when she talked about that, it really had an effect on her. And it just, and we'd heard the story, but it happened the night she had the sleepover, and it really wounded my mom big time.
I know. I kind of believe that a child is really just the environment that he grows up in, or like that's how the person develops, is the environment that he grows up in. And I'm sure you probably heard people say it's like, the year 1 to 3 is the most important years of their life, and that affects their character throughout how they live their life. Versus some people, it's the nature versus nurture debate, where some people it's just nature, like that's how they were born. And I could see it in between, like my 2 children, my boy and my girl, where their nature, it's different. But we're nurturing different things in them to respond and act a certain way. So like if somebody gets mad, you don't want them to, reciprocate that anger or reciprocate those things. So did that affect you? Like did you, as you grew up, did you reciprocate anger and how you responded to a lot of things throughout your teenage years?
Oh yeah. And very angry, I would smile and talk, but if you made me mad, my brother's the same way. We just can be very angry. It's not like just turn into the Hulk, and even my wife in her phone, she has a like Hulk smash like in her phone, and not
you still kind of do some of it.
Well, yeah, just get excited, but I can control it down. But before I was born again, no, I was just a cursing, screaming, always the same thing. And even with the drugs, I used to always, talk bad about my dad using drugs and this is wrong, and then I ended up using the drugs. And that was the thing with I didn't know any of the issues that I had until really I met Kayla. And Kayla was like, man, my wife now, and I met her 6 years ago, and she started like studying me and being like, oh, this is why you're like this, and this is why you're like, and she started just showing me different things and like the blind spots, like, oh, you had these tendencies, or this is why. And she started just, and then she would say, you know, like a lot of times she'd say, it's not your fault. That's how you were raised, you know. And she would always say the 1 to 3, the same thing you talked about is very important. And I never even thought about that because the way that I would say and make excuses or just kind of overlook everything was like, hey, I had the nicest clothes. I went to private school, and they had other people who didn't do these things, and it was kind of just, hey, how can I complain?
It's the same. It's the same concept of like the wealthy having everything, but like being rich in the physical, but poor in the spirit. As in, like, you have everything, but you're lacking the thing that you actually need.
Yeah,
you know,
and then nurturing, and that was the thing. Like the love, how we grew up, it was just very, you know, like I said, doing whatever we wanted to do. Whatever went. I remember when I was 15 years old. I told my mom that I was going to like a baseball tournament and I was going to go do this, blah, blah, blah. Well, basically, she went to work and then I took a train. I bought my own train ticket and went all the way to Memphis, Tennessee.
At 14?
Yeah. And then...
You were in Louisiana, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I took a cab and I went down to the place, the Greyhound station, Amtrak, because I've rode trains before to Tennessee. So let me just try to do it. The taxi cab picked me up in Kenner by the treasure chest where I used to live, my mom's apartment, mom and dad's. And then I went over there and then I went to Tennessee. And then about an hour from Tennessee, I was trying to give my aunt a call because she lives in Tennessee. And then I called her from a cell phone back when they had like the Nokia, like the first one. And she was like, you're not in Tennessee. Then she called back the phone like 2 minutes later. She goes, oh, my goodness, you are. Because it was a 901 area code. So then I pulled up. She's like, you're in the worst neighborhood. And in Memphis, it's rough, like where the train tracks, where the train station is. So, yeah, we went. And then my mom didn't even know I was gone for like a couple days. And then I called my mom. I was like, hey, by the way, like I'm in Tennessee and I didn't do the baseball. She's like, why? You know, but I was with my aunt. But just small things like that, you know.
So I guess around like 14, 15, was that kind of the start of you starting to do your own thing? And
well, I was always doing my own thing. But like I said, the reason I wasn't involved into like, you know, X-rated things or drugs was sports. Like it never, you know, like doing drugs was frowned upon. So my growing up, we would be in a house like at 14 and I would have like my friends over and my dad would buy us alcohol very young and we would like funnel beers upside down on sofas and
how
you
old?
know 14, 15.
So around that time. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but you know my dad was big into computers before and we had the internet before anybody. So I was left to my own devices in that apartment in Kenner, and that's when I got involved like at like 11, 12. Getting into some deep pornography. And back in the day on the internet, they had like it's still like way more pornography, but like the pornography they had, it wasn't regulated. So like you could anything could pop up on those searches.
What year was that?
It was 1998.
Okay.
Yeah, around 98. I graduated in 04.
Yeah, so things started ramping up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then, but, you know, playing sports and introduced to pornography. We would have my friends come over and they would steal their VHSs from their dad or whatever, and we watch pornography and drink beer. Everybody wanted to come to my mom's house because you could party over there and hang out. My mom was always working and my dad was gone, and my brother, he's 3 years older than me. When I was a freshman in high school, he was a senior, so that's the age gap.
It probably helped you to get into some of those vices or even earlier.
Yeah,
I would think.
That was the thing. So my brother got into, you know, like death metal. So we always had like Rob Zombie. I was always like Pantera and stuff like that. And that's how I got involved with like through him. He went through that scene, and then I got involved with the House of Shock, haunted house. So the House of Shock with my family knew them. And I started getting involved with House of Shock, and it was very demonic, a lot of stuff. And people were like, "Oh, I just visit haunted houses." Oh, that was where I saw cocaine and different things for the first time. I was probably, 13 through 15. I worked at the House of Shock, like volunteered there. And one of the rooms as a kid, I was on I was the Hail Satan room, and my job was to literally stab Jesus Christ upside down and cross and say Hail Satan. That's how impressionable.
How old were you?
14, 13. I guess
So a lot happened at 14
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
15.
So, because in eighth grade actually, so sixth grade to eighth grade, because I remember because I was at a football game and they were like, I was one of the nights I had to volunteer, I had to catch a ride. So I remember I was in sixth grade to eighth grade, and one night I was just like, they were like, hey, you want to volunteer, such and such. This person who was a family friend, was a doctor. And he got me involved on, said, hey, you can come volunteer. And then it was just scaring people at first. And then, you're out there all night till 1 or 2 in the morning, and there's partying and drugs
Just
and the death
stabbing
metal.
Jesus.
Yeah, that was one of the
crazy.
rooms I worked for like 2 nights. It was like one of the last doors. And then after that, they would have their parties and do whatever. And like me, I'm just like I never messed with drugs. I'd smoked marijuana like one time, weed one time. Until I was like, when I was like 13. Then I started when I was 17. That was
But
the
that
first time.
job is really what introduced you to like seeing the drugs. So
Yeah, like seeing drugs and just,
Being-
looking at that, thinking about how far I was to think about stabbing Jesus Christ upside down when I was raised in a church. That's how impressionable a young person. Not that they were introducing me, the older people weren't like bringing me down, like, hey, do this. I just was in that scene of being a volunteer scare.
you
And
didn't know any better.
yeah, and you're roaming around, and then people would say, oh, it's just innocent, and Christians, and people will go there and stuff. And look, I ain't knocking it. Whatever you want to do, that's your thing, but it's just very demonic. And that, just to think about, I would even think about doing that. I don't have shame and like guilt from it, and I know God forgive me from it.
Yeah.
But just to think about, like, that's how far, I never, like, oh, you want to do that, Vincent? Yeah, I'll do it. Just being young, had a shaved head.
You're young and dumb. The thing I think of is like a little bit goes a long way, in the same sense of you may have not been doing drugs or like active in it at the time, but as a kid or just anyone in general, you need to be introduced to it. So some people refer to it as like, Adderall is a gateway drug, right? But the thing that you experienced was technically somewhat of a gateway. It's a way to introduce it to you. It's a way to make it seem kind of cool, or maybe just normal. Or when people try to naturalize something and make it normal, you're desensitized. You don't realize the thing you're actually seeing. Like, for instance, if let's say you're trying to get somebody saved, you can't just shove Jesus down somebody's throat. You get to know them, you love them, and over time, as they're around and you're helping them, they do end up coming to Christ. Or in the same way of a gateway in terms of like pornography, like hookup culture nowadays, it's more commonplace. So generation after generation after generation, things degrade and it becomes more normal and accepted, and then over time, you can't even see why it's wrong.
Yeah.
And I could go on and on about just different ways of explaining it, but that's essentially what happened to you, as in it was now being normalized. You went from having your grandpa being angry, seeing that, not really seeing your parents around too much. Playing sports probably helped you a lot, but you're just a young and dumb kid. You're just having fun. You were, going make, I'm sure probably to make a little bit of money. But yeah, I'm sure you didn't realize at the time.
Yeah, and the thing, they like, even with people at House of Shock, they were nice people. Like, they're nice and stuff like that, but like you said, very impressionable. Like, they would kind of keep me away, like, from, like, that's a young kid. But we were just roaming around, all the kids, and that's when we saw the different things. And looking back, and then like I said, my dad just buying the alcohol, or for us, or we would be like, one night, just tell you a story. Me and my friend Kenny. He was like my best friend growing up, and we would always hang out, and he knew my dad would always come home drunk and acting crazy. We would hang out at the apartment, and my dad would take us fishing about the Treasure Chest Casino. So we would walk from our apartment out there, because we could walk there, and my dad would drink, and we'd stay out all night till like daybreak. So yeah, so my friend Kenny, he would always come over, and my mom would like take the money from my dad, even though he made all the money, because he would spend it. So my dad would always come home drunk or whatever from the bar room. He would always say, hey, give me $20. I'll give you back $100 or $50 tomorrow. And he would always do that. So we'd give him money, and sometimes he would find money and give it. It was just, my dad was all over the place, and he would, And one night he comes home. My dad said, "Hey, give me $20." And my friend Kenny said, "Hey, let's throw him through a door." And we're like, "What do you mean throw him through a door?" Well, he comes. Well, we were in my brother's room. I have another room that's like literally like 8 feet. It's across from each other. So my dad's walking the store, and Kenny said, "Look, you grab him. I'm gonna come behind you and push him, and we're gonna knock him through the door." This is how crazy it was. So my dad said, we were like, "Yeah, we got your $20." So he comes upstairs. He's walking upstairs. I grab him. Kenny's a bigger guy. He's big at like 15. He's like almost 6 feet at this time. And then he pushes me. My dad goes flying through the door, knocks it down. I had these two stacked up snake cages. Boom! The door falls into the snake cage. My brother's in my bed because I had light up beds. My grandpa. Just getting back to the story. My dad's dad was a pimp, an actual like a pimp, and
this is the one that would get angry.
No, that's my mom's thing. He was a mechanic.
Okay,
So my
Your
dad's
other
dad,
grandpa.
yeah, my grandpa, my Mexican grandpa was a real pimp. And so one day he sits me down and he tells me all his stories and how he neglected my dad basically, and and he was a bad person, and he always taught me that like Spanish people, like he was around them, were bad. Like he had scars all over him. My grandpa came from left his town in Mexico, went to Mexico City when he was 13. Then he came to the States around like 18 or whatever, and he was like a professional gambler. Then he was involved in all kinds of stuff with his brothers, and then he went in the military. Became 101st Airborne. One of those crazy stories. Well, in the midst of that, he was involved with a lot of the mafia, a lot of different people. My grandpa, and he was a pimp.
Well, I want to know more about this. Him going through this door.
Yeah. So the door. So the reason I told that story was because I had a bed that was from the 70s. That was like a pimp bed, and it had lights on it. So everybody, like my brother, would want to use my bed or whatever when he'd bring his girlfriend over because he's older, was in high school, and it had these black lights on it. So my brother was in that room. So when I threw my dad through the room, my brother and his girlfriend were in the room, and it was just a crazy thing. My dad's looking up, he's just stunned, and we're like, just that was just kind of like. We fixed the door, and then my mom would come home angry, and my dad would just be like another day. Like you would just wake up the next day, you would smell the alcohol or whatever.
Yeah, but the fact that dude said, "Let's throw your dad to the door," and you're like, "Yeah, that sounds like a great idea."
And it's like it was like now looking, I had a lot of healing from my wife teaching me like, but I learned that I missed my dad and stuff like that. But in that growing up, you didn't think about love, how love, or saying I love you, or a respect and thing. That was never around. Like I respected my other. I knew when I went to other people's houses, I had to behave a certain way, behavior modification. Yeah. So even I've had parents that would tell me, "We don't do this. You do that at your house." Meaning like we know what goes on. That's why nobody would really, unless if they knew what was going on, all the good parents and stuff, they wouldn't let their kids come to my house because they knew that once they found out, they're not supervised, they're drinking alcohol, they're doing whatever, and
which is understandable if you're a parent.
Oh yeah, of course.
No good parent wishes their kid to get into drugs and alcohol and things that they would want them to be against.
Yeah, and growing up, like I said, when I didn't use that, I would drink every now and then getting into high school at 17 years old is when I started smoking weed, got introduced to the other people at my school. I went to a small 1A school. I went to Crescent City, a very small school. Graduating class was like 50 people. But they had like a small group of friends that did drugs, and I started hanging around with them, and that's when I got introduced to ecstasy at 17 years old. Once I got introduced to ecstasy through, again, I had a friends of a friend got involved with some drug dealers and different things. Some not good people, not like just like your guy down the street, but just some not good people, and started getting involved in a lot of drugs. And that's when I got introduced to the ecstasy. They would have like the green Mercedes back in like 2003 and 04. They would have like blue Dolphins. I was famous on the Bad Boys movie and different things. And they were really, really strong. Once I ate one of those that night,
you remember what felt like the first time you had it?
Yeah, I ate it, and then 40 minutes later, I just started feeling really tingly. And I mean, back then they were really pure, like it was just, and it just felt really amazing. And then, it just started, and then, it helps, it amplifies sex and different things like that. And other people were doing drugs, and you were talking for a million miles an hour. So I was like, wow, this is just amazing. Well, they were told me, the person who gave it to me said, you can't do it again. And I was like, I can't do it again. Well, guess what? The next night, I was at a party, and the same person said, I'll give you a half of one, And I did it, and then it was like, I just always thought about that ecstasy. I mean, I'd be in school, and I'd think about ecstasy. And every weekend, if it wasn't baseball season, like my friends, we would go do ecstasy. I remember,
you were instantly hooked.
Instantly. And just the stories. I mean, one night, it was my friend Drew and a bunch of us from school, and his, we went and got he said, we got to get the drugs, and we're going to go to Mandeville. And there's like a park or something, and I forgot the name of it, some park, and you can campground there in Mandeville. And so we're all, doing the drugs, we're all hanging out. Well, we were lighting a fire. Well, I had a gas can. And it was like one of those, like, whatever, 1 gallon gas cans. Well, I go to pour the gas can and, like, just pour some gas. The fire comes and it lights the tip of the gas can. So I start running with this gas can, like, running, like, 15 yards in the direction. I'm holding it's on fire. So then I go like this and I throw it backwards, like, and the gas went off. And then I looked up in the trees. All the trees were lit on fire. Like, not that I was tripping on drugs, hallucinating. They had like fire here. They had all these different things. We're freaking out. I take all the drugs I have in my pocket, and I throw them deep in the woods. We're all panicking, and these 3 like Russian guys that were like at another campground come running out, pouring water and everything. And then we're like, what just happened? We're like, man, we could have just burned down the whole whatever place. I hope we're not going to get kicked out. We're all on drugs, can't even talk. So then we had to go find my pipe with all the weed, and I had to find it. It was just like incidents like that. We were, the people that I was with, Drew and all my other clique, like, they were the same way. Like, they didn't come from his broken home, but they just weren't supervised.
Where did you get all these drugs from? Or, like, did you have the money to buy them, or was it like you had a deal with a buddy?
No. I had the money my parents gave me money, so that was the thing. So, and back then, I was always introduced. I started hanging around the older people. So I started hanging out with my friend, Hunter, who's, they have really successful now families. My friend Josh, I started hanging around those people, and they introduced me to like other people. So we had fake IDs at 17, and we would go out to Bourbon Street and party, and with our fake IDs, and then, the drugs, we just through friends and friends, we got introduced to the drugs, and then, we always had them. We could always get them. They were around, back then, you could, all these ecstasy rave scenes. That was when raves were on the scene at the Sanger Theater.
If you're looking for something like that, you'll find it.
Exactly. Yeah. I always say now I couldn't even know where to even call.
No, but I would have no idea where to look. But I tell you what, if I wanted to, you find something, and then it's everywhere. It's a little trickle effect.
Well, yeah, and then so I started doing the ecstasy, and I started really getting involved, and I started thinking about ecstasy a lot, and then it started affecting my baseball. I even started going to baseball games, like at high school, like still tweaked over from the, because they were so strong, you would feel, I remember one night we had a big game at Delgado, and it was a night game. It was at Delgado College, but we were in high school, just using their stadium, and I was rolling like on ecstasy as a term. I was like rolling, tweaking on my mind. And I hit one off the wall. I hit one like 3 for 3. I was just running around like crazy because it made me superpower. But that was just
you were living.
Yeah, I was living, and and partying, and that's why I tell parents now that have like these teenagers now, knowing what I was involved in high school, and if parents knew, I can't even imagine what these parents are involved in. I mean, just the deep sin I was involved in, and through all this, being involved in drugs and doing this, I still had "What Would Jesus Do" tattooed on my ankle. That was my second tattoo, I believe I got. I went to church. I always would said, God said it, I believe it. That settles it for me. My grandma would always tell me, like, even when I fell off, like, getting fast forward using the ecstasy.
Did you feel any kind of, I don't want to use the word remorse, maybe like regret or like I cannot think of the correct word for it, but did you feel bad essentially about doing ecstasy and then still going to church, and then I'm sure hearing things against it now?
Well, I didn't know. So I never. So I
Did they
think.
not preach against it, or
Yeah, and I didn't really know because I didn't really. And I would have encounters with God, and people. I always ask myself, or people ask me, like, what if I'd have died? Then was I really saved? Like I remember growing up at Lakeview Christian, I would have encounters with God, like going there, like in real encounters, like having crying at worship, and then I was even going to Victory. I would go to Victory ski retreats, the church on Airline. But then, like, you get older and then you start falling to sin. I remember when my brother would have parties a lot at the house. There was a time when I was like 14 through like 15, I would just pray and I would read my Bible, and they would always try to get me to drink, and I wasn't doing that. And then fast forward, it was like I got like, I guess 15 and a half. It was like, I guess 13 to 14, then 15, that's when I got, and by 17, that's when I got introduced to ecstasy. And that's when I was just full out, drinking whatever I wanted to do, going to the clubs, partying. And then by my senior year in high school, I wasn't going to church at all.
that's what I was going to ask,
Yeah.
if you had just stopped altogether.
Yeah, I wasn't going to church at all. And my parents, they weren't going to church or anything. My grandma would always go to church, but, I stopped altogether.
Today's sponsor is America First Advertising. Looking to boost your business's visibility? Meet America First Advertising, your go-to solution for digital signage and space. With networks spanning from Baton Rouge to Mississippi, they offer 25 screens in each network. Those locations in high-traffic venues like Walmart, Subway, doctor's offices, restaurants, and gyms. So you can imagine your ad being seen over 1,350 times in a single week. Ready to start your advertising? You can visit AmericaFirstAdvertising.com, or you can give them a call at 985-615-2680. America Advertising, where your business comes first. I would definitely recommend using these guys. Their screens are literally all over. I can't go anywhere without seeing a screen. So it's highly likely if you're sitting at a restaurant for 30 minutes to an hour, you're gonna see your ad. If you're interested, AmericaFirstAdvertising.com, or you can give them a call at 985-615-2680.
But some will say that's interesting about doing drugs is that, and I won't say who it is, but I got Adderall from somebody. And, if you're not supposed to be taking Adderall, and I absolutely have ADD, undiagnosed. I do things to fight against it, and I actually do believe that even if you do have it, there's still things you can do to combat it. As in, here's a test to see if you have ADD. If you have an event that's going to go on that day, you can't do anything before that event happens. So like this podcast, I wouldn't have been able to do anything before it happens. Maybe watch TV, almost sit there and just like wait for the event because I can't do anything else. That's a form of ADD.
Yeah.
But now that I'm conscious of it, I combat that, and I'm like, no, I can get all this stuff done. I'm not going to just immobilize myself from doing things. But my point is that I took this Adderall, and what's crazy is that after taking it, some people say it helps them focus, but like it was like speed. I was focused on everything. But one of the crazy things I did, believe it or not, was I put on praise and worship music, and this is me as like, I don't know, a teenager. I put on praise and worship music, and I'm focused, and I just feel great. And I didn't even take it with food, so like my stomach's all warm, and I felt amazing. And I actually started calling people, and I was like, hey, do you need prayer for anything? I want to pray for you. And I'm having this like spiritual experience. And I actually wrote down what they needed prayer for, and there's other people that I knew of stuff that was going on that they needed prayer for. And I had a buddy who had a child at the time, and I remember he was not able to see his child because they had separated. Whatever, it wasn't a planned pregnancy at all. It was like a girlfriend at the time, but I prayed. I was like, I want him to see his son, and do this and that. Ironically, all the things that I was praying for, and I kept a log of, because I was like, I'm going to prove that prayer works. Mm-hmm. So I wrote it all down, put the date, put a bunch of information. Several months later, I watched all these people's prayers ironically start coming true. So I thought it was funny that the Adderall gave me this spiritual experience that I now started doing all these. It was a really good thing I was doing. But the thing I wanted to get to is there's actually people in like third world countries who will actually smoke marijuana or do drugs and then go to church and have these like otherworldly spiritual experiences. Like it elevates them. And I'm not saying this to like promote drugs by any means. I do not like Adderall. I will not take it. But I'm just talking about the time that I did. It was hilarious. But there is people out there that like microdosing on mushrooms. It's becoming more commonplace, and it's difficult for me to say like whether it's good or bad. However, I'll stand against it and say that you shouldn't do any form of drugs. I don't even like taking not Adderall. I meant to say ibuprofen.
Yeah.
I don't even like taking ibuprofen because it numbs the pain. You don't know where the pain's coming from. I want to be able to fix the pain, and I can't fix it if I can't actually feel the injury and like what tweaks it. What, like when you go to a doctor, can you put your hand this way? Can you put your hand that way? Oh, does it hurt when you go that way? They write down a few notes. And you're like, I could have done this at home. The only difference is I just didn't know what you knew to tell me to do after. If all I knew was to go do these corrective exercises, I could have just done this.
Yeah.
But no, anyways, that was my point, was that it is interesting, the mix of drugs and religion, because you were going to church, but you were still taking these drugs. And I'm sure it also had an effect on you where you're like, you're feeling good, and then you go to church, and then you have this encounter with God. And it's probably somewhat of a similar experience, I would assume. Like there's a person actually at my dad's church that he'll always quote this because he had a similar story as yours. And his thing is, there ain't no high like the Most High.
Yeah.
And that's what he always says. I never fully could understand it because I didn't do what he did. But
yeah, getting back to, going to church, and that happened later on when I was going to church really on the drugs. That happened after, that started using and stuff, and it kind of, put that hindrance like, oh, I shouldn't be at church. I finally realized that. At first I would just kind of, bounce in and stuff like that. But when I got full on into drugs, 17, 18, especially during that summer, in the middle of all that, what's crazy is I joined the Army. I used to want to be a Navy SEAL, so I watched the Navy SEAL documentary. So I used to soak myself in ice water and run around the whole neighborhood. So like crazy. So one year I failed out in football. I failed 2 classes, so I couldn't play football. So all I did was just run and train. I wanted to be a Navy SEAL. So my junior year in high school, even though I was using drugs and stuff like that, I signed up. I got a Ranger contract with the military. So the following year, my senior year, like I didn't take SAT. I didn't do any of that because I was going in the military. Well, boom, I'm going in the military. I graduated in summer school, like because I was behind. So I was always going to summer school every year. And then I had to get my diploma in the summer of my senior year. So I got my diploma, and then I was at a party at a boathouse over there in West End in New Orleans. And we were all drinking, partying. It was my going away party. I was leaving like in a month. And so we're like, hey, let's get on the flatboat. So like 5 of us get on the flatboat. Well, I'm on the flatboat drunk, and we're riding the waves, and it's going up and down and up and down. Well, we hit a wave. It throws me up in the air, and boom, I landed. My tailbone hit the seat post. There was no seat there. I went flying. And when I flew up in the air, I hit my tailbone. I laughed, and everybody's like, ha ha, Vinny, ha, And then I was like, oh my goodness. And then the shock from being so drunk and all the pain, it was excruciating pain. Basically, I was stuck, and they had to bring the boat back. I had to get him rushed to the hospital. The doctors, like I woke up the next day at my house, basically, they're all on medication. And they were like, hey, your tailbone's bruised. So I'm like, all right. So the military, they come in the thing, and they're like, hey, you're going to be fine. You're going to ship out. Well, like 2 weeks later, when I was supposed to ship in 2 weeks, actually, a hurricane happened. So then it got delayed. So I shipped out a month later because they told me I'd be healed in 2 to 3 weeks because it's a bruised tailbone. Well, I get to the military, I join my infantry contract, go there, and I'm super stoked. Like I can max my PT, I can do everything. But I'm hurt. When I go to there, I can't move, I can't do anything. My tailbone's killing me, but it's supposed to heal, So long story short, I get to there. There's we were at war, so we all knew we were going to war. My friend Jose, who I got to sign up like a year before, he's at war at this point. He was like one of my close friends.
What war was this?
Iraq, 2004. Okay. I was like big time, 03, yeah. Iraq to 08. They were pumping out soldiers. Right. basically I was in a line, and then you stand on a box to see what kind of shoe that fits, and they're like, man, you have extremely fat feet. And I was like, they're like, wow. I was like, yeah, they told me. I was like, yeah, but your feet are flat. Well, fast forward like a week later, like I'm going to ship out, like finally I get all your stuff. Well, then I couldn't move at all. Like my tailbone still hurt. I'm like, gosh. So I had to stand up in front of 600 people and say, hey, I have asthma, to delay it. Because what happened was, when you get to the military, there's a moment of truth, and they ask you if your recruiter lied to you, or if anything, you need to come forward now if you have any type of injuries. And I didn't come forward. So, and then you're like on a prison compound, like you're just waiting, like it's just like all these people like this compound. You can't like get on the bed, you can't do anything. You're waiting to get shipped out or shipped home. So I was like, man, I can't tell these people I got hurt, because then they're going to keep me here for 2 months, and I've already missed my chance, instead of sending me back home and sending me back. Well, long story short, man, I can't move, I can't do nothing, and I just feel like the most worthless person, because I'm like, I call my parents, I'm like, look, I'm hurt. They don't whatever know that I'm hurt. We'll end up they EPTS me, got rid of me because of my flat feet. Well, the day after I got home, I went to the emergency room, I went back to the doctor, and I fractured my tailbone. And so that's why it took 4 to 8 weeks, but the swelling was so bad they just said it was bruised. So then my mom was like, we need to get an RSU and all this stuff. I was like, whatever. So then I came home, and I felt like such a letdown. So what did I do? Start using drugs, again. And then throughout that, and then what's crazy is I get a phone call saying such and such that we know is over at the sheriff's office. You can get a job at the sheriff's office. So I got a job at the sheriff's office. And I can't, I got a job at the sheriff's office. So I was 18 years old. I still was like, man, the military, my friend Jose's at war. Like, I feel like still a little letdown. Like, this is what I wanted to do, but it just didn't work out. And even like fast forward, like 5 years after that, I tried to join back the Navy because and they said because the EPTS, they wouldn't let me and all that stuff.
It almost sounds like there's you going on the boat and hurting your tailbone happened for a reason.
Yeah, and it was the Lord. So I look back now, but I was like, I felt like such a letdown, and that's why I wanted to tell my story. It was important because people don't know, like, why didn't Vinny go in the military? What happened? Like, that's the God's honest truth. The Lord blocked it, and I broke my tailbone, and then I came back, and then I became a sheriff's deputy at 18 years old.
Do you ever think, Lord, there could have been a different way? Yeah, I didn't have to break my
Yeah, I mean that, but he.
I mean, do you think it would have been anything else? Like,
no, I was set. It couldn't have been any way. Like, even through the broken, like, I wanted to go back. I wish they would have sent me home. If I would have had it my way, I could have just said, hey, my tailbone's hurt, I can't move, send me home for 2 months, let it heal or whatever, and I'm coming back for the military. But God, they EPTS me, like, and made it where I couldn't come back at all. So I was like, oh. But, when I joined the sheriff's office, I started working in the jails, I started working in the courts. Well, long story short, my uncle was a high-ranking, like, person. And we started talking, and my uncle said, yeah, I'm like God around here. And turns out, like, a couple months after, he got in a wreck and got in big-time trouble and stuff like that, and whatever happened. But I just remember that conversation, and I remember even working at the sheriff's office, I was the youngest person in the whole state that was commissioned. Like, they weren't even allowing me to, like, I wasn't supposed to be in the academy, so I went to go to the academy, the sheriff's office academy, and they said you can't be here. But then they made me stay because of my family, so they allowed me to stay. So I came.
So who was your family that was associated with it?
He's like a family friend. He's a sheriff deputy. He was a high-ranking sheriff guy. And really nice guy. Well,
but he had a lot of power in that place.
Yeah. And he had a lot of power. And I became a sheriff, and I went through the academy, and I was able to, I graduated at 19 years old. I was able to carry a Glock 17 firearm, but I couldn't even legally buy one. So I was working at a detail at the Harris Casino one night, and I was 19 years old, and they had a club, Masquerades, and one of the deputies was like, who brought you over here? I'm like, I'm 19. Well, a state police called me up in the office at the Harris, and they were like, well, what's going on? Well, they had to look into my credentials and said, listen, you can get paid for tonight, but you can't come back here because you can't legally work here. So because of the stipulation in the law, 21 to be in the casino, we have our own crazy laws in Louisiana. So, fast forward, I started working those details. Well, what happened one night, I was working back in in June of my first detail I ever worked at one of these clubs. I was working, and I had the 11 to 1 a.m. shift, 11 at night to 1 a.m. And you could pay like $45 an hour, at least. And it was just a 2-hour quick one, so I made a quick $90. Well, I said, hey, I'm gonna go back in this.
That was good money, early 2000s. Well, I mean, it's still good.
Yeah,
money.
2005. I was
still good money, but
I was making, legitimately, from the details just alone, I was making like $820 a week just from details.
Yeah.
On top, so back in I was a 20-year-old kid, a 19-year-old kid with these details. And brand new car, motorbike, living. I was living good. It was rent was back then was $650. Like these apartments that are like $1,100, those are like $700, $650 now. Because I went to go look back at them, and they went up like $300 or $400. Well, now even like $600. Well, anyway, I was working that detail. Well, I said I'm gonna go back in the club to go talk to these girls and stuff like that because I knew a lot of the people in the club. It was a college bar, and I'm 19 years old.
Young, got money, 19.
Yeah.
Probably good looking. You were trying to go get in the military.
So.
Well, I mean, not that you're bad looking now, but,
So Joe went back in, and they had a guy that was talking trash earlier from one of the fraternities and whatever. Well, when I walked back in the club, he was arguing with somebody. He was the same guy who bumped into me earlier, but he saw I was a sheriff, and my uncle told me before, he said, you can go back in there. But a sergeant was like, I don't think it's a good idea for him to go back in the club. My uncle was like, yeah, he's good. And I'm like, I'm good. So what happened is I walk in, I take my shirt off. I got a black shirt on with just green pants on. I walk in, and the guy's arguing that bumped into me. He's arguing with one of the bouncers. Well, they're arguing, and the bouncer grabs something, and then the bouncer hits him. And like he hits, and then so I'm thinking, I'm stupid. I just hit the guy too. When I hit him, his friend hit me with something across the side of my face. It felt like a sledgehammer. Boom! We just cracked. I just hit him, and he just cracked me, and I just was like literally spinning in circles. And I remember biting.
Seriously, I'm confused. Why did he?
They were arguing. He was arguing. So the guy that had problems with me earlier, he was like just like a troublemaker, was arguing with the bouncer. So the bouncer and him started fighting. So instead of me being smart and just whatever, I'm thinking young, and I hit the guy. I'm off duty. I'm not even. I just was.
You were excited.
Yeah, I was just
like, this
excited.
is my time.
Yeah, exactly. So I just hit this guy. I'm off duty. Not even in uniform, just a black shirt. Well, his friend shatters the side of shatters the side of my face. All of a sudden, I'm in there, and my uncle comes running, and he shuts down the whole bar. He starts hitting people with the stick. He grabs me, and he's like, "You all right?" I'm like, "No, I'm not all right." So literally, I go bring back my unit to the jail, and they have roll call. It's like 5:30 in the morning. They had roll call at the jail because I had to drop it off at OPP. And they're like, "What's wrong with your face?" And I went to the doctor, and boom, shattered jaw, was in the wire. So then I was in the wire for all this time. Well, Katrina hit. So during Katrina, they let me leave. They said you can leave, and because you're not gonna have a blender to your food, and we don't know what's gonna happen. And that was another way of God protecting me, because they ended up on the bridge with the inmates. My uncle literally was one of the head people in this. He had to get the people. I would have been with him. He was stuck on a boat for like a week, and just bodies everywhere. It was just a whole total nightmare that the Lord protect. And I would have been wired shut. But the crazy thing is, I ended up in Houston
in the midst of that storm.
Yeah, so they were.
So that was quite a lot. So is your uncle the guy that had a lot of power within the prison?
Yeah. So he was there.
He was there during Katrina, and then they all ended up on a boat.
Well, he was there Katrina, so he was in charge of like the special investigation. So he would always getting the inmates to Hunts and Angola and shipped out, because the State Department, Hunts, Angola, Gabriel, all of them would have to get their inmates because they were just panicking. So he was the one, and it was filling up. It was a hot mess, and he was involved. They were on a rooftop.
What did they do with the prisoners during Katrina with something like that?
They shipped a lot of them out, from my understanding, and then a lot of them, they got stuck there too, and it was just chaos. Imagine you got all these, you're automatically in there
having to unlock everybody in their cell.
Yeah, and a lot of people from New Orleans can't swim, so you're in there. There's a lot of water. There's lights are off. There's wind. They watch the news. They see the eye of the storm. There's just a lot. It was a lot of chaos, and they had a lot of, just a lot of death. A lot of death.
But they sent you out, right? Because of your injury.
So they said you could just go. So everybody asked me where I was with Katrina, and they were like, "Vinny got lucky. He was able to leave." Which, looking back, I wanted to stay and help people, But I left and I ended up in Tennessee, and then I ended up from Tennessee then traveling to Houston, and you know, got set up in Houston for a couple, you know, till everything settled for like a week. But what was crazy was I was supposed to get my wires off like 2 days after the storm, the timeline, but whatever, so I couldn't get it. So they gave me an appointment like 3 weeks later in Houston. When I called to get that appointment to take the wires off, they told me like they didn't accept the insurance, and the phones were down back then. Like people were missing everywhere. It wasn't like you could find people as easy on Facebook. Like my ex's dad was missing. We didn't know where he was. I looked in the Houston Texans stadium. I went everywhere looking for him. We were looking. We thought people said a dream that he was dead and stuff. Well, when she finally came back home at her grandpa's house, it said on the thing, it said her dad answered like, "Hey, I'm in Dallas. Like I'm okay.
Yeah.
I went to Dallas to the thing because he was."
Well, Katrina hit and everybody just like splattered across.
Yeah,
the US.
Houston, you know, Arkansas, but the thing was, it was like the Wild Wild West. You had people everywhere. The technology on Facebook wasn't fine, and so you had like just the newscast, but you had people missing, you had people dead. What's the truth? Can we return? What's the laws? And then after you come back, like I remember they were like, "Oh, you can't come back." And I was like, "Well, I'm a cop." I'm like, "Yeah, I can come back." So yeah, they said, "Yeah, you can come back." So I was driving around like a maniac on Carrollton, like 50, 60, 70 miles an hour in my truck, just running, doing whatever I wanted to do. I get pulled over at gunpoint, and they're like, the cops then, the police, they were already wild, you know. Now they were just like, let somebody come steal, let them act crazy. What we trying to loot? And I'm like, I'm a sheriff deputy. Like, oh, it's all good. And they were like, just have a good day, because they were just people at that point. They'd become so crazy.
That sounds crazy to you're going 70 miles an hour on a road that's probably like what 40 at most.
Like 35. Yeah,
being
just
stopped at gunpoint, and then
you're just flying around.
Listen, I'm one of you, and they're like, oh, we get it.
Yeah. That's how it was. They at gunpoint because you got pulled over, and I was just like, yeah, I'm a sheriff. They're like, yeah, all right, and that's because imagine like Slidell just being totally just smashed up. No, non-existent, no lights. You don't even know. Yeah, you don't even know if anybody's returning. You got the police that had been up for days, weeks. They don't know their pay. They've been away from their family. They're not playing games. So it was just like they were just like finding whoever, and you know, it was like let somebody come and act crazy. It was just like the Wild Wild West, and you already have that mentality. So yeah, when I came back, we were just, you know, riding around, and the sheriff's department was just basically obsolete. So I went back to Houston. I was dating a girl at the time, and she was in high school still. I was this time I was 19 or almost 20. She was 17. So I was in.
So all of this happened around 19 or 20.
Yeah. Sheriff's deputy, and then the flood, the Katrina was 05. So yeah, I was 19, and basically I came back to the sheriff's office like 2 weeks later, and then. Fast forward, and then so my timeline's a little messed up. That's when my uncle got the DWI, like right after that, like a couple months after, because he didn't drink for like 10 years. He was a severe alcoholic. He didn't drink, but then, you know, the trauma and everything from, like, he jumped through body. I don't want to say the stories. A lot of the stories are somewhat exaggerated, but they're real and like overlooked because they had a lot of, you know, the children. He was like, they had a dead child he had, and it messed him up. And then
a dead child.
Yeah, from the water, because he was in the water, like picking up he was like in the water picking up the kids, picking up the people floating. Like, you know, my friend Kyle, his dad died in Katrina. So people actually died. It's not like a conspiracy. Like, people died. They had many children drown.
There is a conspiracy about the levees.
Oh, yeah.
But we don't have to get into it on this podcast.
Yeah.